I never thought betrayal would come from my own blood. At 72 years old, I found out that the home I had built my entire life in, the walls that had heard my laughter, my prayers, and my tears, was gone. Sold behind my back, without a word, without even the decency of a warning. Hello, my dear ones. Before I begin this painful memory, let me first greet you properly. My name doesn't matter as much as the story I am about to share, because it could be the story of any mother, any grandmother, who has given her whole life to her family. I want to thank you for being here with me today. If you enjoy listening to stories like mine, I would be grateful if you considered subscribing. It helps me keep telling the truth of lives like ours. But even more than that, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please write in the comments. Tell me what city or country you are in. When I read those words, I feel less alone, as though the world is listening. Now, today's story is one of loss. Not the kind of loss you can prepare for, like when old age comes knocking at your body, or when you bury someone you love after an illness. This was different. This was a kind of wound that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to deserve it. I want you to stay with me until the very end, because what happened was not just about a house. It was about trust, about blood, about dignity. And if you leave halfway, you will miss the moment where everything I believed about family collapsed in front of me. The tragedy began quietly. A home is never just bricks and wood, you know. It is a container of lives. My husband and I bought our little house when we were barely older than my son is now. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. A small porch where I grew roses, a kitchen where I spent years cooking meals after long shifts, and a living room where Christmases were spent with too many people crammed onto the old sofa, their voices layered like music. That house was the map of my life. My husband died in it, peacefully in his favorite chair, his hand slipping out of mine while the evening news mumbled on the television. I thought I would leave that house only when God himself called me. I thought it would be my last address on earth. Never once did I imagine my own son would take it away. I began to notice little things, letters arriving in the mail that looked official, thin white envelopes with windows that showed printed addresses. I wasn't used to that. My bills were always straightforward. When I asked my son about them, he said, "Oh, it's nothing, Mom. Just routine. Don't trouble yourself." His voice was firm, but too quick, too practiced. I wanted to press, but I didn't. He had his own worries. He was busy, always busy. But the feeling didn't leave me. I'd catch him on the phone late at night in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones, his back turned to me. When I walked in, he would end the call too fast, slide the phone into his pocket, and smile like nothing had happened. I told myself I was being paranoid. I reminded myself that he was my boy, the same boy I carried in my arms when he was sick, the same boy who used to run across the yard with scraped knees and sunburned cheeks. He wouldn't hurt me. A son doesn't betray his mother. At least, that's what I thought. Days turned into weeks. One afternoon, I saw him standing at the mailbox, holding a thick envelope. His hands shook as he tore it open, scanning the pages. His jaw tightened. When he noticed me watching from the window, he shoved the papers back inside and forced a grin. "Just bills, Mom. Don't worry." But I did worry, because the house had been in my name since my husband passed, and I couldn't think of what kind of bill would make my son look that way. I should have asked more questions, but mothers, especially old mothers, sometimes choose silence. We don't want to trouble our children. We don't want to push them away. So I bit my tongue. I brewed tea instead. I told myself that love meant trusting. Then one evening, I noticed a car I didn't recognize pulling up in front of the house. A man in a suit stepped out, clipboard in hand. He walked slowly around the yard, taking notes, tapping on the wooden fence, even peering at the roof as if he owned the sky above it. My heart tightened. I stepped outside and asked, "Can I help you?" He smiled politely. "Just doing an inspection." "Inspection for what?" I asked. Before he could answer, my son came rushing out, shaking the man's hand too firmly. "It's fine, Mom. Don't worry about it." But I did worry. My stomach turned. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. That night, when I went to bed, the house felt different. The walls seemed colder, the rooms more fragile, as though they already belonged to someone else. I pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders and prayed it was only my imagination. But it wasn't, because the next morning I found a letter in the mailbox. It was addressed to me, but when I opened it, my hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. Inside was the truth I had been fearing without even knowing it. The house, the home I had lived in for 50 years, the home where my husband had died and where my children had grown, was no longer mine. It had been sold, and the signature on the papers was my son's. I don't remember how long I stood there on the porch, letter in hand, eyes frozen on that unfamiliar legal language. My knees trembled. The morning sun was warm, but my body felt cold all over. My son had signed my name away. When he came home later that afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the papers spread out before me like a wound that refused to close. "What is this?" My voice shook. He glanced down once, then looked away. "Mom, you don't need to get upset. I was going to explain." "Explain what? That you sold the only home I have? That you went behind my back?" He sighed, rubbed his temples like I was the one causing him trouble. "It's complicated. You wouldn't understand all the legal stuff." "Don't you dare," I whispered. My throat was raw, but the words pushed their way out. "Don't you dare speak to me like I'm some old fool. This is my house. Your father and I built our lives here. I raised you here. And now you tell me I wouldn't understand." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Shame, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "It's for the best, Mom. The market's good right now. I got a good deal. You'll be taken care of." Taken care of. As if I was some fragile object to be placed on a shelf. I wasn't asking to be taken care of. I wanted respect. I wanted honesty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. But inside, I felt something heavy crack open. A silence deeper than any I'd known filled the room, pressing against my chest. He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, the new owners won't bother you for a while. You'll have time to adjust. Maybe we can find you a smaller place, something easier to manage. You'll thank me later." Thank him? I stared at the man my son had become. He spoke as if I were already gone, as if my memories and my roots could be boxed up like the old china set in the cabinet. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, and my hands trembled so badly I had to grip the edge of the table just to steady myself. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the same room where my husband had once dozed in his chair, where we decorated every Christmas tree, where children's laughter had once echoed. The walls felt like strangers now. I kept running my fingers along the arm of the sofa, as if touching it would somehow anchor me, but the truth burned too deeply. It wasn't mine anymore. The days after were a blur. I still cooked, I still cleaned, I still watered the roses on the porch, but it all felt borrowed. People always say you don't know what you have until it's gone. I knew exactly what I had. I just hadn't realized it could be stolen. Then came the strangers. One Saturday, I was sweeping the front steps when a couple walked up the driveway. They were young, smiling, carrying a folder of papers. "Hello," the woman said kindly. "We're here to take a look at the property." The words sliced through me like glass. My property, my home. Before I could answer, my son appeared from inside, shaking their hands, leading them through the yard as though he were the owner. He didn't even glance at me. He spoke with enthusiasm, pointing out the details I had built with my own hands, with my husband's sweat. "The garden gets plenty of sun in the morning," he said, standing in front of my roses. "The kitchen has been kept in excellent condition." Kept, as though someone else had done the keeping. I stood there frozen, broom clutched in my hand. I wanted to scream, to demand they leave, but the words wouldn't come. My son laughed with them, walking room to room while I stood like a ghost in my own home. Later that evening, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the sky. My chest ached with a grief heavier than any I had known, even heavier than when I buried my husband. Because death you cannot prevent. But betrayal? That cuts deeper. And still, I told no one. Not yet. I went to the store the next morning, and as I was putting groceries into my cart, an old neighbor stopped me. She tilted her head, frowning. "I heard your place is on the market. Big change, huh?" I froze. My tongue felt heavy. "Yes," I said softly, though the word tasted like poison. She patted my arm. "Well, I'm sure your son has your best interests at heart." My best interests. Everyone seemed to believe that, except me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the papers. My husband's photograph sat on the shelf nearby, his steady eyes watching me from behind the glass frame. I whispered to him, "Did we raise him wrong? Did I do something to make him this way?" The silence was unbearable. "I want to pause here, dear ones, and ask you something. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you confront your son, demand answers, or would you stay silent to keep peace in the family? Please tell me in the comments. I need to know what others think, because in those nights, I felt utterly alone." As the days passed, the reality settled in like a fog that refused to lift. Strangers kept coming, inspecting the walls, measuring the rooms, commenting on the age of the roof, the shade of the trees. Each time, I felt another piece of myself being peeled away. And then came the moment I will never forget. A young man in a dark suit sat across from me at the dining table, flipping through his folder. He spoke with the voice of someone who had practiced these words too many times. "Mrs. Allen," he said, "the transaction is already finalized. The deed is no longer in your name. Legally, the property belongs to the buyers." His words hammered into me like nails. Finalized, not mine. I looked across the table at my son. He couldn't meet my eyes. In that moment, I realized I had lost more than just a house. I had lost the boy I raised. After that meeting, nothing felt real anymore. I moved through the house as though I were trespassing. Every floorboard creak, every familiar smell of wood and old curtains whispered back at me, "You don't belong here anymore." My son avoided me. He went about his days with a forced brightness, clattering dishes in the kitchen, humming tunes under his breath, anything to fill the silence that hung like a storm between us. Sometimes I would catch him staring at the ground, his lips pressed tight, and I wondered if guilt gnawed at him, but he never spoke of it. I, on the other hand, couldn't stay silent. I needed to understand. One evening, after dinner, I finally asked, "Why, son? Why would you do this to me?" His fork clattered onto the plate. He didn't answer at first. He rubbed his hands together, the skin between his knuckles pale. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered again, the same words he'd used before. "Try me," I said, my voice firmer than I'd expected. He leaned back, exhaling hard. "I needed the money, Mom. I had no choice." No choice. Those words echoed like a cruel joke. "You had a choice," I whispered. "You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. Instead, you sold my life out from under me." He slammed his fist against the table, startling me. "Do you think I wanted to? I was drowning. Debts, bills, everything piling up. I thought this would solve it." His eyes met mine for the first time in weeks. They were sharp, desperate, and strangely proud, as though he expected me to understand. But I couldn't. I thought of all the times I had gone without so he could have more. The second job I took when he wanted to go to college. The nights I spent stitching clothes by hand because we couldn't afford new ones. Every sacrifice was still stitched into my skin. And now this. "I raised you to be better than this," I said softly. His jaw clenched. "I did it for the family. For you too. You'll see." But I didn't see. I couldn't. The very next morning, another stranger knocked at my door. This time it was a young woman, her smile polite, her eyes scanning the rooms with curiosity. She carried a clipboard, and behind her, a man in a baseball cap walked the perimeter of the yard. I felt humiliated. My home had become an exhibit. After they left, I broke down. I sat on the living room floor, my back against the sofa, tears soaking the rug I had cleaned countless times. That rug had felt the small feet of children running across it, the paws of the old family dog who used to curl at my husband's feet. Now it felt like cold fabric under a stranger's claim. Later that week, a neighbor stopped me by the mailbox. "I didn't want to say anything before," she whispered, "but I heard your son was talking to buyers months ago. I thought maybe you knew." Her words stabbed deeper than she realized. Months. He had been planning this betrayal for months, while sitting across from me at dinner, while smiling on my birthday, while pretending everything was normal. I thanked her and walked back to the house, every step heavier than the last. Inside, I stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me had deep lines on her face, eyes rimmed with red, but there was something else there too. A spark. Not anger. Not yet. But resolve. That night, I pulled out an old photo album. My husband's hands, steady and proud, holding our newborn son. The three of us standing in front of the house, the paint fresh, our smiles wide with hope. Page after page, memory after memory, all tied to these walls. And now, my own son had traded it away. I realized then that this wasn't just about bricks and wood. It was about betrayal. It was about dignity. The next time he walked through the door, I looked at him differently. Not as my boy, but as a man who had made a choice that tore something inside me I wasn't sure would ever heal. "Son," I said, my voice steady, "you've taken something from me that you can never give back." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He didn't reply. I leaned forward, my hands folded on the table. "But this story isn't finished. Not yet." That's where I'll pause for now, dear ones, because what came next was not just about losing a home. It was about confronting the truth, standing up when your own blood has pushed you down, and discovering whether forgiveness is even possible after such a wound. Stay with me, because in the next part, you'll see what he finally admitted, and why it broke me more than the sale itself. The silence in the house stretched on for days. My son and I moved like strangers, passing each other in the hallway, sitting at the same table but never truly speaking. When words did come, they were clipped, careful, as if both of us feared the weight of what might slip out. But inside me, a storm raged. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily he had lied, how calmly he had hidden everything. A son, who once ran into my arms with scraped knees, now hid contracts and debts like secrets buried in the dark. One afternoon, I decided to search. Not because I wanted to spy, but because I needed answers. I needed the truth. I went into his room when he was out, my hands trembling as I pulled open drawers and rifled through papers. And there it was, stacks of unopened bills, letters from creditors, words like overdue and final notice stamped in red across envelopes. My chest tightened. He wasn't lying about the debts, but what broke me was that he had chosen silence instead of honesty, betrayal instead of trust. He had decided my home was worth more to him as money than as the heart of our family. That evening, I confronted him again. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked quietly, holding one of the letters in my hand. He looked at it, then at me, his face pale. "I couldn't, Mom. I didn't want you to worry." "Worry?" I whispered. "Do you think this is better? Do you think finding out like this is easier?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I just fixed it, if I just handled it, you'd never have to know." But I did know, and the knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. Later that night, I sat on the porch, staring at the roses swaying gently in the breeze. My husband had planted those bushes decades ago, his hands calloused from work, his smile wide, as he promised me we'd grow old here together. I had kept that promise. My son had broken it. The neighbors noticed my absence. "You haven't been yourself," one of them said kindly. I smiled faintly, unwilling to explain. How could I? How could I tell the world that my own child had sold me out? One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of gold, a man came to the door. He was tall, in a pressed suit, carrying more papers. "Just here to finalize a few things," he said politely. I let him in, but my heart was pounding. He spread the documents across my dining table, pointing out sections, asking for acknowledgements, as if I were a guest instead of the owner. My son stood beside him, nodding along, silent but complicit. When the man finally left, I turned to my son. "Look me in the eye," I said. "Do you understand what you've done to me?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, he looked away, his shoulders sagging, his silence louder than any confession. That night, I couldn't bear to sleep in my own bed. I lay awake on the sofa, the shadows of the room wrapping around me. Every creak of the house felt like a farewell, every breeze through the curtains like a reminder that soon none of this would be mine. And then a thought struck me, an unbearable thought. If he had kept this secret from me, what else was he hiding? What more could he take before I even realized it? I didn't want to believe my son was capable of worse. But betrayal has a way of planting doubt, of making you question every smile, every word, every silence. The next morning, as I brewed my coffee, I made a decision. I would demand the full truth. No more half answers, no more evasions. He owed me honesty, even if it shattered me. Because I had already lost my home, I refused to lose myself too. Dear ones, this is where episode 1 must end. I want you to sit with me in this silence, in this heavy uncertainty. Imagine what it feels like when the person you love most betrays the very ground you stand on. And stay with me, because in the next episode, you will hear the words my son finally admitted to me. Words that cut deeper than the loss of my home. Words that broke me in ways I never thought possible. If you've ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted, tell me in the comments. Your stories help me feel less alone.